Okay.
Thanks very much, Steve. So I know a number of people here in the room having been to a few of these conferences, and those of you who know me know that I'm passionate about two things, Synergy Alberta and IAP2. So wasn't it amazing when we had this opportunity for the two to come together? And so I'm really excited to be able to moderate this panel because I'm passionate about both organizations, and I think there's so much in common between the two. So those of you with the Synergy group that aren't familiar with IAP2, it's a professional organization that seeks to promote and improve the practice of public participation in nations throughout the world. And for those of you, my friends from Wild Rose IAP2 that are here, Synergy Alberta believes that we can get more done working together at the grassroots, and we have an amazing group of community and industry here with Synergy Alberta. So Synergy Alberta meet IAP2 Wild Rose meets Synergy Alberta. The purpose of the panel tonight is to explore how Indigenous engagement can be done in a more inclusive and meaningful way. And what can Synergy groups and IAP2 Canada do to help raise the bar on Indigenous engagement? I'm really excited about the fantastic panel that we have here. On my far right, we have Art Cunningham, who is a proud Métis and Senior Aboriginal Tribal Policy Advisor at TransCanada. Chelsea Crowshoe, who's a member of the Piikani First Nation of the Blackfoot Confederacy and Senior Advisor Cultural Competency with Alberta Health Services, and Anne Harding, past President of IAP2 Canada and Senior Advisor, Stakeholder and Aboriginal Relations at Suncor. And there's a sheet on your table with awesome information on all the panelists that we're very fortunate to have with us. So rather than presentations that we often get at Synergy conferences, and because of the Indigenous oral tradition, we thought we would be better telling stories tonight, and that was Anne's idea. I can't take credit for that. And so what we've done is we've asked each of our panelists to tell you a story. They're going to give you a brief story, and then we're going to have some questions for them, and then open the floor for you to have questions for our panelists. So I'm going to kick it over to Art, and Art has 5 minutes, and I'm timing him, and he knows that. And Art's going to provide us a story for context.
Well, two things. If you can control my 5 minutes, my kids would love to talk to you. And secondly, I'm impressed by the turnout. I understand that this is somewhat optional and it's the last part of the day, and you know, my experience in conferences, we were certainly off doing some other things at this time of the night, so I am quite impressed. But as Gaia told you, I'll tell a quick story where it captures, I think, some elements of engagement, but I think engagement isn't one story, it's a continued experience that I have experienced throughout the 32 years of working as a liaison practitioner for an energy company in this province. And my first experience was when this company reached into my community and asked if I'd like to come to work for them. Totally strange back 32 years ago. It's extremely strange that happened. And again, it was a vision and a leadership of the CEO of the company at the time. And so sure, I'm an electrician. I can go work and make a lot bigger money. Had my new first child on the way and everything made sense to me. So off I went. And then the next experience, I said, well, we want you to think about moving to Calgary and becoming a liaison. I said, well, what's a liaison? And it took me about 6 months to learn how to spell it properly. But you know, the role back then was quite foreign to the industry. It really was extremely foreign. And one of my first experiences was, it says, we also made a contribution to a traditional land use study. And I said, what's a traditional land use study? Now, this is the mid-'80s. And they weren't done. There was no rationale, but a community in Northeast BC, a group community, was wanting to undertake the first church land use study in Alberta and the second one in Canada. I said, sure, I'll go up and be involved in this. And good. And, you know, my mindset, oh, you know, young fella, and my grandfather said a saying to me one time. He says that those who think they know it all is actually the first day they start learning something. And actually, it was a bit of me, because I was a pipeliner, I was an electrician, I was going to go up in this remote northern community and be involved with this church land use study. And I learned a lot just from that experience. One of them was, you know, I thought we were going to come in and help them be able to identify traditional areas of traditional activities for them. Who was I to think that we're going to help identify, you know, and that was my perspective, and that was the perspective of the company and one of the rationale. And the learning was, first of all, they insisted on traditional land use study, not to identify the sites, but because they're so tired of energy vehicles driving up and down the roads and nobody ever stopped to talk to them, that they felt that this was one of the only ways they can get the attention of industry, was to take this path of, well, at least now if we let them know that there's people here, there's a society, then that maybe they'll pay attention to us. And the only way to let them know that is start identifying that. You know, it hit me, you know, and it's explained quite firmly by a couple of elders around that perspective. You know, you're not doing us a favor. We know where everything is. What do you think? You're going to come and show us where these things are? I know where the salt lick is. I know where the berry patch is. I know where medicines are. And, you know, we're hesitant to share it, but it's the only way we can get your attention. Well, lesson number one, you know, it's wow. Yeah, they want us to stop those trucks and talk to them. A novel idea. So I was, you know, I spent the whole summer and part of the winter learning through that church land study. You know, it was great, and we're the only industry involved with that study. And when they had the big celebration, I gotta tell this story from a senior elder, Albert Nakaho, and he says, and he was up there telling the story about his experience with the first church land use study, and he says, you know, we're proud of your company coming up and helping us. You're the first energy company that stopped your truck and talked to us. Oh, good. And he says, you know, it's like a lead dog and a dog team. And he says, you know, I'm not a lead dog. Yeah, he says, you're going to experience a lead dog and dog team about building a path for all the people who come behind you, fighting the winds, fighting the challenges of the direction you need to go and everything. I said, yeah, well, thank you. And I'm starting to round up my perspective. And then he says, yeah, but the view of the lead dog's a lot better than all the dogs that follow me. So. But the important message, you know, again, is to stop that truck and having that discussion was all they wanted to start being involved. And so that was, and the last 8 years I've been working in the United States with the different tribes on our assets in the United States, and again, a great learning experience for me. And I was around with a group of tribal chairmen, and we got into the discussion, and what surprised me was they said, you know, there's been one president who has done more for Indians in this country than anyone. Oh, I was curious, well, why is that? And who was that? And he said, well, it's President Reagan. Wow, you know, to me that was, I would never have guessed that President Reagan was one who had done most. And his belief, and he stated it many times over, that if you don't talk to Indians, Indians are going to hurt. And the reality is, that's true. That's the experience of Indians in North America. That if we don't stop and talk to them, engage with them, they're the ones who feel the impact of that lack of engagement. And they continue to prove that in all elements, whether you'll hear some health comparisons, etc. But it's a simple start. It's just to talk, a level of recognition that there's an Indigenous peoples here. And that goes. And the experience is a personal one for me, but it's also one that I can lead, I continue to lead with the company that I work for, and very proud of the successes and the efforts that we continue to make. So, as they feel in the States and Canada, I think more and more talking is happening, more and more positive things will happen for us. So I hope that.
Okay, thank you very much, Art. And I was remiss in not explaining to the Wild Rose people that part of the reason that you got to have dinner tonight is because TransCanada Arts Company sponsored our panel for tonight. So I want to thank TransCanada for their sponsorship, and also thank Jason Vaness from TransCanada who helped with this panel. So that talks to some of the commitment of your company, Art. Thank you. I want to pass it over to Chelsea now, and Chelsea's going to give us a little story about being engaged.
Let's check. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, and good evening, everyone. 5 minutes. I'll try and keep it to that. Time is a concept when you do engagement that may vary how you're engaging. It might not go the way you want it to go, and especially if it's story-based, you need to give that time to get those stories, because that's true engagement, and to learn from those stories going into the First Nation communities. So I'll try to keep it to the 5 minutes. I'm usually pretty good with time, but. So my perspective is more from a healthcare field. I've just worked in Aboriginal health pretty much since I've graduated high school, and it was year 2005 when I finished one journey working for Treaty 7 Tribal Council here in southern Alberta that focused for the Treaty 7 First Nations, and I worked in their health department. And with change in government, as we all are aware now, change in government means potential changes in the future. So an organization ended and re-evolved itself, and then that's where my path ended with that organization, and I started a new one with Alberta Health Services. So been with them for 10 years in several positions. I was, as indicated, managing the Alberta River Healing Lodge, the position that I applied for, saw it online, thinking, can I even do this? And it was just a new concept, even for Alberta Health Services, to have a targeted, customized, culturally sensitive service for Aboriginal populations here in Alberta. So it was the first primary care center focusing on that. Like, okay, so that's new, it's something new. I like being a part of something new and being able to be creative and provide that opportunity and being a part of that to serve, to serve my people. So I entered into that and thought, okay, well, how do we do this? This is a new concept for this huge system. And at that point in time, it was Calgary Health Region. And what does that look like? And how did it evolve? So ultimately what happened is engagement processes have always been in place within Aboriginal communities in some shape, way, or form. And our program it's one of the foundational values and way we do things. At that point in time, we had community voice, and that community voice was the Aboriginal Community Health Council. There were some people from different organizations, different departments that provided, how can we support Aboriginal populations in Calgary Health Region at that point in time. And the concept of this primary care center, because of the health disparities that the Aboriginal population faced, thought we need a more customized approach to support that, because there's different ways of doing things. And I think that's the importance about engagement, is there's different ways of doing things and being creative about it. So one recommendation was this health center that would provide more, availability for Aboriginal people to access healthcare. Because there is that fear of accessing healthcare that still resides today, but it's an opportunity to feel welcome and coming from a different holistic approach to it. So it's like, okay, I think I can do this. And so I got to engage and be a part of the beginnings of that. And we opened our doors in March of 2006, and that facility still is in existence within Alberta Health Services and is integrated. So it's looking at concepts of, better ways to do things and support things for the population that you're serving, and finding common values, looking at the parallels. Things may be done differently, but there are parallels in how we do things and having to engage in that way. So I ended up being the manager there for about 3 or 4 years, and people engaged in Aboriginal health, working in Aboriginal health, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. I think it's the passion and commitment that really resides in that. I then went to manage the Aboriginal health program overall for Calgary Health Region. And when we do planning processes or anything like that, engagement and having that community voice was very important, and integrating ceremony in different ways, identifying that, opening, starting in a good way. And I like to thank Casey for his prayer today and blessing the meal and just us and learning and education for us in general. So I'd like to thank you, Casey, for that. And so we integrate that within the system as much as we can. Then went on a maternity leave and came back to some change. We became Alberta Health Services. We're all one. We're an organization that has over 100,000 employees. And one of the top priorities, at least for us as the Aboriginal Health Program, was to enhance cultural competency working with the Aboriginal Health Program, or with Aboriginal people. So that was a role I came into, and that was like, wow, this is another new role that I get to be creative. What can we do to support healthcare providers? What can we do as a program to support Aboriginal patients entering into the healthcare system? And through that is different engagement strategies in general. So currently my role, I've worked with working groups and with the community. We've developed a cultural competency framework that did have the voice of Aboriginal patients, Aboriginal health employees themselves, managers, physicians, healthcare workers, to have that voice of how can we work together better. And advocacy and engagement and relationship build and teamwork was all the major foundational components of that. So we've always, and we have strategies in place in Alberta Health Services called Patient First Strategy. You may have heard of it, where we're looking at really trying to bring human back into healthcare and include that voice, because things have become so robotic and so checklist. You enter the system, you're told where to sit, you get your demographics taken, you get told to sit, you get your wristband, you get asked all these series of questions. But it's like, now let's bring back that humanness back to it and having everyone's wisdom, because everyone does have wisdom. And so that's what we're trying to incorporate in different ways within the healthcare system. And once I ask the question, I can give examples as well of, what are other ways that, as industry can do that, and different hiring practices and that as well. So I don't want to take up too much time. So that's a quick story. I can go on forever probably, but, and I'd like to pass it on to Anne.
Great. Thank you very much, Chelsea. We're going to pass it to Anne, and we will get back to you, Chelsea, with some questions in a few minutes.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to Casey as well for the prayer this evening. And yeah, thank you for coming. I think this is a great topic, and I'm really glad to see so much interest in it. So I'm going to share excuse me, sort of two stories or two reflections. One is my own, and one is borrowed from a colleague. So first of all, Gay has familiarized you with IAP2. So I'm involved with IAP2 Canada, and one of the initiatives that we've recently undertaken is to identify ways that we can increase Aboriginal inclusion within our organization, but also within the profession of public engagement, and how we can support the people who do this work to do it in a more meaningful, authentic, and in a good way. So we had this team put together, or a call out, to our members back in the spring, and it's funny, IAP2 is a volunteer organization. And so often you put out these calls for volunteers, and they sort of, you hear crickets. And you go, okay, well, really we're sort of scraping to get people. Well, we had 27 people respond within, I think, a week from across the country with interest in this topic and in participating. And I think that's got to be a record. So fast forward to this morning, actually, where we had a workshop, a 3-hour workshop on brainstorming some ways that IAP2 can increase Indigenous inclusion. And we had 10 people participating in that room, including Casey, as well as some folks here tonight, Jessica Dick in the back, Brenda Walton in the middle here, David Markham, I believe, is here as well, and Jason Vaness, who's convening this group. And then we had 4 people on the phone as well, and really engaged, even though they were on the phone for 3 hours in a workshop. And so I just want to share a bit of what I learned in that session, that there is a lot of excitement and energy and trepidation and heart around these topics and around this work. That we, as IAP2, or as people who do public engagement, we are not the system. We are not the center of the universe. But we are part of a system. We are part of the bigger system, and we really need to think hard about what our role is in helping to change the system in a positive way. We heard from members of the Aboriginal community that our traditional approach to project-based public engagement is quite limiting. A meaningful public engagement process would be one that focuses on relationships first, which I know is a big part of the synergy approach, understanding the needs and interests of a community after that relationship is built, and then engaging in a specific topic or project, but being open to where that conversation needs to go. And not just limiting that conversation to that one project at that one time, that we should expect that there's a holistic perspective and create processes that support and value that holistic view. And then also that we need to apply principles to our decisions and approaches that reflect that holistic and long-term perspective. And one suggestion that came up that resonated really well with me was to consider the 7 teachings in the way that we do this work. Both as work with Indigenous communities and work as an organization. And so the way that I've been told those, and I do believe they might vary some, is that that's truth with courage, honesty, love, respect, humility, and wisdom, and that we consider those principles as we move forward. And so with that, I'd like to share a story. I'm going to take more time. It's not my own, but it belongs to an IAP2 Canada colleague who's based in Vancouver. And this is a story about an experience that he had with a First Nation community in Northern Ontario. This is a project that recently won IAP2 Canada's 2015 Core Values Award for Indigenous engagement as a category, as well as our National Project of the Year. And you can find out more about it and watch the video of this story at iap2canada.ca/2015 Core Values Awards. And I can give you that website after if you want. So the project was called Working It Out Together, and it was with Pikangikum First Nation. So the Pikangikum First Nation, and the story is from Jeff Cook, by the way. Pikangikum First Nation is on a journey of taking control of their health governance, increased self-determination, and building a stronger, healthier community. They started this journey with a community health needs assessment based on over a year and a half of extensive community engagement, research, and analysis completed in December of 2013. And now, 2 years later, Pikangikum First Nation is celebrating the completion of its community-based participatory comprehensive community health plan, which translates the needs identified in the CHNA into an innovative, accessible, and implementation-ready plan to how to translate those needs, issues, strengths, and vision into tangible action. The community had never completed a community-based process of this kind, driven by the community and for the community. The purpose of this process was to produce a well-researched, community-based, participatory health plan to directly support community decision-making. Rather than being a technical assessment by health professionals, this process was initiated and driven by the community, supported by a collaborative relationship with the planning team from Jeff's company, Berinja. Through adopting a community development approach, the process emphasized local capacity building, widespread participation and inclusion, and empowerment on a path to healing. These approaches are central to breaking the cycle of colonization and trauma, especially as concerns Aboriginal health and well-being. The community's approach to planning and relationship building is based on 5 pillars. That's community-based, capacity-driven, strength-based, culturally relevant, and integrative. And the outcomes of the strategy were increased confidence of the participants, healing, improved understanding of community issues and needs, recognition of traditional knowledge, and an agreed-upon program of action. The process had historic participation. Around 2,600 community members, they engaged more than 864 different community members. They used multiple scales of participation, engagement tools like drawing, creating comic strips, open discussion, community radio, digital response technology, I don't even know what that is, storytelling and ranking. The emphasis was particularly placed on increasing the skill base of members through tools, consistent communication, and workshops. Working in Pikangikum First Nation means engaging with people in their second language. Ojibwe is spoken by 100% of the population, and many elders do not speak English. Local translators were hired to translate during community workshops and open houses. When possible, summary reports were translated into Ojibwe syllabics and discussed on the radio in Ojibwe. In a community where negative media reporting has dominated the community's reputation and image, The importance of starting with the community's strengths and existing assets was paramount in order to build community pride, optimism, and acceptance of the process as an internal process and not something imposed from the outside. Community members engaged in activities that helped them retell their personal and community's story. In doing so, community members were actively confronting a history of colonization, exclusion, lack of power, and trauma. Their process is a living document, and their plan is a living document that is already achieving results for the community. The process and plan has created hope for the community of Pikanchicum. It's an inspiring example of how planning can be a source of healing and celebration of community strengths, despite severe community challenges and conditions, through effective community design, participation, trust building, and in honoring local culture and language.
Thank you very much, Anne. So some great stories from our panel, and we've got some questions to get the discussion going, and then, as I said, eventually we're going to open the discussion to the floor. But I'd like to ask our panel for some thoughts on how organizations like Synergy Alberta or IAP2 can support more meaningful Indigenous engagement. Which of our panelists would like to start?
Sure.
Right.
Okay. Well, it's like what I've learned throughout the years is understanding what your role in the whole. First of all, understand that it's an important role that your organization can play in engagement. To grasp that concept that we believe we can play an important role. We have a lot of talented people, a lot of different perspectives, and then identifying what that role is and understanding the environment that you're in is, I think, quite critical. And then going around to establishing your business case, if you wish, on how you're going to implement, how you're going to look at what you believe you can contribute to. And that's a big one, is what you can contribute to. And you know, the business case is, there's a lot, we have a business case for our company, and it's simple. It's access to land and regulatory compliance. And each one of you folks in your organizations have your own business case, probably set around some principles, understanding Indigenous populations, for example. You know, one of the principles that I think is very relevant and clear is that a diversity of the cultures that are in the society that we live in. Alberta, you know, many different cultures, many different perspectives. And if you don't respect that diversity and look the way governments have over the years and the industry have over the years, that they have a cookie cutter approach, one way of looking at it. Well, if I've talked to one Indian, that means I've talked to all Indians. And you know, that is a very dangerous way to come from. So adopt and understand what does that mean. And then adopt the other perspective of what is their relationship to the land, of the society, and to us is really important. You know, one thing from our industry's perspective that is different, and I coach internally quite a bit, that we're unique in our company because we're dealing with issues. Now remember, our company is an engineering-based or a science-based process company. That's how we make decisions internally. And what stands us out quite differently is because our issues that we have to make decisions on are culturally based issues. And that's quite unique. And that's not only unique for energy, but it's unique in the broad society, is a culturally based issues that the society is facing with when it's interacting and engaging with its Indigenous peoples. And if you don't understand that, I believe it's a position that's going to put you in behind about trying to bridge that understanding at times. And there's a lot of reasons historically for it, and I'm certainly not a historian, and I've heard many of them speak to, but that, from my experiences, that's what stands us apart. That's why governments have Aboriginal Affairs Department. That's why companies have Aboriginal Affairs Department, because they know there's a uniqueness out there. They're just not sure what it is.
Okay,
a lot of times
thanks very much, Art. I'm gonna.
Yeah,
we have to watch Art. I'm going to ask Chelsea now, what do you think some of the organizations like IAP2 and Synergy groups can do to make engagement more meaningful?
I think you guys are starting to do that already with the groups and the engagement processes that have taken place that you mentioned, Anne. But I think with the change in government, and I know change can be scary, but I think change can lead to opportunity. And what does that mean? It's a chance to look at your current practices and say, okay, have we been making a difference? Do we really have that voice? And re-exploring what can we do differently, or being more inclusive, because some practices are more exclusive. There's that us and them sort of mentality, and really exploring how, when we are engaging with Aboriginal communities or Aboriginal people, and take this from a healthcare context, but nothing about us without us, and making sure that voice is at the table. So I see change as opportunity. I know with the new government, people may be fearing that in different ways, and we don't know exactly what that looks like, but it's, to me, opportunity, and let's sit down and see what's going to work better, or what has been working, and what can we make even better than that. So I'm coming at it from a high-level, global type perspective, not just energy and industry. And just looking at different practices they have in place. So,
thank you. I really like that phrase, nothing about us without us. It's really important. Anne?
Thanks. So I think I'll share some of what I heard this morning as some just really practical, what could we do today? Because there's what can we do in the long term, and certainly those are really important things to keep in mind. But something as simple as acknowledging the traditional territories that we're on when we convene public events and convene together, whether there are Indigenous people directly involved or not. I think as people from a settler perspective and community, that's a really important thing to acknowledge. We can try to understand what our role is in advocacy or in working with governments, but again, not from our own perspective, but by working with Aboriginal organizations and Indigenous communities to support that process in whatever that looks like. And a lot of the work that IAP2 does is around training and professional development for people who work in this field, and really taking a look at the training that we offer and the materials that we produce to see how they can support capacity building of settler non-Indigenous perspectives, but also within Indigenous communities, to really get more members or more communities involved with IAP2 as an organization. And I would challenge Synergy to create a deliberate way to do that as well. I know that we always think that we're very open and we want everybody to be involved, but sometimes it takes a deliberate outreach to create that safe space.
Chelsea, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I'm changing the next question up. So we talked about how non-Indigenous organizations can be more inclusive. Can you give some examples of a couple of tools that you might use for being more inclusive?
There's just depends. Okay, for me, from a facilitator perspective, there's different ways of doing that and that engagement. But to be more inclusive, within Alberta Health Services, we've looked at roles, and both Anne and Art have talked about, the role and what role do we play in understanding those roles. Within Alberta Health Services, an example that we've done is we've incorporated, liaisons within the healthcare setting to support those Aboriginal patients and their journey throughout the healthcare system. Incorporated these, specifically to help support them and the families coming and entering the system. So there's different engagement strategies from a global perspective and from a one-on-one perspective within what we're doing within healthcare, but recognizing those roles of being important a part of the system as well. We have cultural helpers as well, traditional wellness counselors that help engage from a spiritual perspective. So we're bringing that holistic framework and the values that Anne talked about and incorporating them within how we deliver our service for and help supporting the organization to do that as well at a program level. So hopefully that answers that question for you.
Great, thanks very much. Art, maybe you could add, you made a comment earlier about, recognizing that it is a different culture. Maybe you can just give us a couple of things that we should be keeping in mind about, Indigenous communities and and how engaging with Indigenous communities is a different culture that we have to work with in the work that we do.
Well, I got to go back to some of the principles. And it's funny, when I was hired to be this liaison, and again, I didn't really understand what it meant to this. And when I talked to the CEO at the time, who led this vision of his, I asked him, what does that mean? And he says, well, the reason we reached and hired you and a bunch of other guys from the different communities that we had, and they did purposely went into different First Nations communities, and I was, I guess, a token Métis at the time. There's a little in humor there, but they did, and he did it for a reason, and he says we need them to help us understand how to properly talk to these communities, how to sit down and understand that diversity. And that was the first time I heard that word, diversity, and it's very significant. It's that internal capacity building that he was starting to build with his belief within his culture of the corporation that we were working for. So it really made it significant to me, because that was part of one of the first instructions we were given, is to respect the diversity. So what you might be a priority for one community might not be a priority for the next community, due to a whole lot of different reasons. And one of the most difficult things to do, the larger bureaucracy, is to manage diversity, and it's a tough role. And I think folks like yourselves could be leading that what it would take to manage that diversity. What are the elements that could be successful in that? Because that's one of the biggest struggles that happens out there when we talk about an Indigenous people, is that respect of that diversity, and how do you incorporate that in your strategies, your decision-making processes, exactly that. So that's one key element. And again, that was through my personal experience and the job I was given way back 30-some years ago, and they still pay me to do the same job. So it's forever, and listening and being engaged forever is really a commitment that is really key, I believe, to success.
Thanks, Art. Anne?
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on that idea. So in my other hat of working at Suncor, I've been working over the last year to support the creation of an Aboriginal employee network within Suncor. So a lot of companies have employee networks to support diversity, as Art is talking about, but we haven't at Suncor. So we wanted to create a space for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal employees to come together to advance Aboriginal inclusion at Suncor. We talked to some of the other companies that have started up these networks, and what we've learned is that it needs to be grassroots. It needs to come from people. If people are going to come up with creative ideas, they need to care about those, and they need to that needs to be reflected in the work. But in a large organization and a large energy company, they're also, so you need that bottom up, but you also really need that top senior level support and top down. And so it's been a really fascinating journey over the last year to watch that evolve and to see, again, the interest. We put out an initial call and didn't know how many people would be interested in this. We were thinking, okay, maybe 20, 25, and we've had over 100, and we now have 175. And people from senior VPs to heavy equipment operators, and right across the country. And it's about half and half, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people who are part of that. And it actually has had us as an organization reflect on, well, why? Why are we doing this, and why is this important for us as a resource company? And it actually goes back to a conversation I had with Art a couple years ago, I think, asking him about that, and it's exactly what he said. It's because having Aboriginal people working in our company connects us with the values of those communities where they come from, and understanding that it is those communities. It's not that broad community, but that each community is unique. And so we really do value having those Indigenous perspectives in our organization, and now we're being a lot more deliberate about engaging those in decision making and in conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Anne. So I'm going to open up our discussion to members of the audience. I think Jan and Paul are going to be our mic runners. We only have one mic, but maybe Anne and I can share. Paul, why don't you come and grab this one? And also on your table, there are little white cards. And so if you don't want to speak at the mic, but you would like to write down a question for me to pose to the panel, I'd be absolutely thrilled to do so. So do we have any questions for, yes, we've got a question over here right away.
Oh, you're going to hold it.
Oh, the mic runners aren't allowed to let go of the mics, otherwise they lose their jobs and they get sent home in shame, so they will hold on to the mic.
I get no ice cream if I let go.
No, not a problem. Thank you to each of the panelists for sharing your stories and experience. My name is Stephanie, and I have a comment and a question. My comment around describing these communities as being unique or different can be problematic. And so I urge and just worry that if we consider them to be unique and different, then that might create certain perceptions around that there's different challenges and barriers to engaging them, and to practitioners and service providers who are not Indigenous might use that as a way of either not engaging them or making decisions around how to actually meaningfully and effectively engage them in decision-making processes. The question I have for each of the panelists is, within your own respective roles, what methods, approaches, and mechanisms do you use within your own organization or within your own roles in working with the communities? So what methods, approaches, and mechanisms do you use to actually engage Aboriginal communities in decision-making processes? And so it's one thing to engage them, and it's also one thing to have them as representatives on a committee or a board or a group, but how, and acknowledging that a one-size-fits-all approach or model of engagement doesn't work. And as Anne had mentioned, engagement in one First Nation community or in one Aboriginal community is different. So how do you each tackle that in terms of engaging different communities and acknowledging that engagement processes might look differently? For instance, in Stoney Nakoda, there are 3 bands, 3 chief and council, whereas in Siksika Nation, it's 1. So how might that create some different approaches or mechanisms to engaging those communities?
Sure, sorry. And I guess for me, when I was using the term unique or different communities, it was saying that each community is unique, as you've described, with a unique context in its own. And I think it is important to acknowledge and understand that as somebody, even somebody outside coming into a new community, whether that's Aboriginal or not, to understand the people who are there. And so for me, I think we have a number of different ways that we engage. I think we know in the energy sector, I know we don't do as good a job as we should. One of the ways that we do that is through advisory groups a lot with communities, and often those look different depending on which community we're working with. But that is one of the very common mechanisms that we use to say, okay, here's a particular project that we're looking at or program that we're building. How would that meet your needs, or what would you want to see reflected in that? So often, for those familiar with the IAP2 spectrum of decision making, we're often at the consult level. We don't move to a place of involving or collaborating on decision making, where I'm really excited about this network because that's part of the intent of it, is that there is that decision making, program direction, strategy development from those communities themselves.
Art, and then we'll go to Chelsea.
Yeah, I'd like to wait for the green light. The first one is the uniqueness is through the issues that we manage in the engagement, and they're quite unique in relative. For example, the Western viewpoint of land is quite different than what we what we do when we engage Indigenous people. Spirituality of the land, there's no land processes out there in our Western side that incorporates some spiritual element to land. So those are the type of issues that are unique, that you have to include in your engagement with Indigenous peoples. And again, that diversity speaks to the spirituality is quite different from one community to the other. And so you have to think about that and uniqueness, the language, etc. And then to the other point is, our industry is quite unique, and it's not only in Canada but North America, is we're the only ones by law or regulatory expectation that have to go in these communities, meet them face to face. And so the best way to start a dialogue is going and meet with them face to face, and you ask, well, how do you develop the strategies? Well, it's, concept of engagement, talking. This is what our expectation is to do. Found lots of success in sitting down face to face and talking to them. And say, this is what we'd like to do, this is what we plan to do. How can we work on what's important to you together? This is what we have to meet, and in that dialogue is extremely important. But there's a commitment. There's a commitment of resources and people with those element of skills and capacities to do that effectively, to respect the protocols, to understand the approaches of that diversity of the communities that you do. And my little trick over the years, and part of what my role at the company is, to any new areas that we're looking to build, I go in as the first person there. First of all, I'm an employee, which is significant. I'm an Aboriginal person of significant, and I know pipelining. So these are the elements that I can talk with some credibility to face. And then the next thing is I always go to the longest serving bureaucrat in the community, because they know everything and anything you want to know about that community, and start building my knowledge of that community around what's important to them, how to approach them, who should I talk to, all of those elements. But it takes time and resources and an investment. But those are the tools that we think is important in applying in those initial engagement, those discussions. Then you come back and you figure out how you can make it effective.
Okay, Chelsea?
I'll speak to a mechanism that Alberta Health Services has. When we were in regions, we had community health councils across the province. When we became Alberta Health Services, we had to lose those health councils, had to dissolve. So when Alberta Health Services changed, they knew they needed that community voice across a province, from local areas, and because the issues may differ between the north to the southern part of the province. So health advisory councils were developed, and some of you may be sitting on a health advisory council for your local area. So that's an opportunity to have that voice about health concerns and issues that you may have that are pertinent to you, where you live, et cetera. The Aboriginal voice was lost as well when that happened, and there was no mechanism in place to get that voice. Representation at those councils were not, Indigenous voice was not at those health councils. The different type of recruitment strategy to get people to sit on those councils, because they are voluntary, and that as well, the process weren't in place in enough time to get that Indigenous voice. So what happened was a recommendation was brought up to the CEO level of Alberta Health Services for another Aboriginal-focused voice. So the Wisdom Council is now developed. It's been in existence with Alberta Health Services for the last 3 years, and consists of 20 members, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, from a multitude of lived paths, so elders, ceremonialists, professionals, youth. So it's bringing that voice back, and it sits at the same level as the CEO office. It's direct voice to executive leadership team, and they have priorities that they're looking at to help support the Aboriginal Health Program, and Alberta Health Services provide better care. So that's a mechanism that Alberta Health Services had to provide that voice.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from the floor, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it a little bit. We often talk about the capacity of First Nations and Indigenous groups to engage, and this question is, how do companies engage with Indigenous people authentically when sometimes the community has hired non-Aboriginals to take on some of that engagement role, and as a result, the company does not hear the grassroots Indigenous people's responses or desires? Who wants to start? Art? Okay.
Sure. Yeah, face that. That's part of the evolution of engagement. At one time, it was very easy to engage the community because nobody else wanted to talk to them. Reality was. Now there's a lot of things that have changed over the course of the recent history that has put them in a stronger position to have and wanting people talking to them. So that has changed. Capacities. It's all, again, the diversity of the communities are all at different levels of evolution in their own capacities, in their own governance structure, and how they are going to do business. And so the first thing that we paid attention to was our own capacity to understand that and realize that we're going to be faced with these briefcase cowboys and people that third world, and that's another reality of the world we're working in, is the third world industry. And I'll give you an example. When I first started, when these legal decisions started coming out, I went and asked our corporate lawyer, I said, Murray, what about these court cases? I says, I don't understand Aboriginal law, so I have no idea. It wasn't important at the time. So he said, go out and find a law firm that can give us an opinion. Okay, fine. So I used my network across Canada and found 2 law firms in this whole country that'd be willing to give an opinion that they felt they had some knowledge and expertise. I'll tell you right now, you cannot find a lawyer in this country that does not claim they're expert on Aboriginal law. Why? Because there's big money. It's a third industry. And that's a risk also. And part of your own internal capacity is to understand that, is to understand when and how you have to use different strategies. If you really truly believe that you need to work at a grassroots level, there's different strategies that you can do to maintain that. The best strategy is when you go talk to them when you don't need anything, because lawyers aren't interested, and consultants aren't interested. But you get to talk to the people in the community. That's when you start your dialogue, is when you really don't want nothing to start to understand. Build that relationship at that point, and then when you do need to come around, you've built a level of understanding and a relationship with the people in the community that you can have that dialogue without the lawyers and consultants at the table. Because I'll tell you, they're making the majority of the money out there, and that's somewhat concerning and distressing.
Thanks, Art. Chelsea or Anne, do you want to add to that?
First, I think all the communities have the capacity built within it already. It's there. It's knowing that wisdom and that knowledge and being invited in to understand it from an external perspective. And as Art said, is yes, building that relationship. It's not going to happen overnight. They're going to have past and previous experiences that have happened within the community where people have gone in and out. But ultimately, the community too wants to have, I think everyone wants a win-win situation, and how you get there may look different from another, engagement strategy you have with another community. But that wisdom and that capacity is already there, and it's just finding ways to tap into that and working with them so everyone has that win-win.
Okay, we have time for one more question. One over there.
What do you think will take for Canada to reach that point where we don't talk about, well, our Aboriginal people, but just say, this is our culture? What does it take? That's
a big question. It'll take time, but I think, education system hasn't helped us very much along the way. Our history, the history of the original peoples of Canada has not been told respectfully. You are hearing stuff coming out now with Truth and Reconciliation, Declaration on Indigenous Peoples from the United Nations, and the recommendations are coming out from that. Education is happening. Right now, I think education is key to have that foundational starting point, and this just continued dialogue. There's a lot of, even when I was in school, there was so much I didn't even know and learn about Indigenous people. I did not grow up on reserve. I have a different lived experience, but it's education is the starting point, and then going from a more bystanders to an allies approach, I think, will happen eventually. But understanding where we stand or where our history stands, because we all are, you know, part of the creation of the history of our country. So and respecting that. So big question, but it still will take time.
Thanks. And so I shared the story earlier of Jeff Cook and his work with the Kanchikum First Nation, and I sent him some of these questions as well. And I'd like to share one of his comments is that saying that Canadians need to commit to a more informed understanding of Indigenous history and find ways to increase our cultural competency as a nation and reconciliation through shared meaning, experiential learning, reciprocity, and recognition. And so I think I also would like to reflect on some words that Casey shared with our group this morning. That you know, there's a lot to be said for language, and if I get this wrong, you can tell me, and we'll give you the mic. But that in Indigenous languages, there is no word for Aboriginal or Indigenous. We are all people. We are all human, and fundamentally, I think that's the understanding that we need to come to this with, and with that openness and understanding that we are all human, and bring that human element back, as you've talked about.
I'll add a different perspective in one is from my observations of working in this area, and when asked to explain why the difference and if that difference, and I believe it's, you know, Canada and the United States, North America has been called the melting pot of the world, where people from all over the world, all little different cultures come and mingled and formed these countries, which is true. And the melting pot formed it together, and they established society norms. Well, the part of the issue is that they neglected or ignored, or whatever words you'd like to use, but did not include Indigenous people. They weren't recognized for whatever reason of the day, and you can have those many debates, but that's the reality of it is. The many cultures that we have benefit of in these countries have come together and have set society norms and standards around religious, spirituality, land, all of that aspect, with their own cultures and perspective in place, and how to celebrate that. However, but again, the issue in the past has been that there has been an ignoring of the Indigenous peoples, and it's through policy and it's through deliberate activity of the day, whatever you want to describe it. And historians have a lot of neat words for it, but what we're doing is mending those fences right now, where the inclusion means that, yeah. You know, I haven't ran into an Aboriginal or Indigenous community that's not want to play part, contribute, be part of the broader society. But it also wants their elements, their culture, whatever, included in that consideration when we're going to talk about the norms of what we're going to live under in the future. And my optimism lies with the youth in all of our communities on both sides. I think there's a broader understanding around Canadian youth from a Western society standpoint around Indigenous people, but from our own communities, there's very optimistic views about how they get along together and how they work together and how they engage and respect each other's cultures. So, but that's my own personal observation around that, and again, my own optimism around because the kids are going to lead us to a better future.
Thank you very much, Art. That's a great note to end on, a note of optimism. So I want to thank our panelists very much, and on behalf of Synergy Alberta, I have a small token. Oh, we're going to pass down. Okay, there we go. A small token of our appreciation for participating in the panel, and thank you so much for your time, and thanks to all of you for your time.